and such things. In the case of the rainforest, such as Brazil, apparently there was very little construction, but people developed agriculture, at least horticulture. Cassava is a Latin American crop. Do any of you know what it is? It's a root. It also has leaves that are edible. The roots of most cassava varieties are poisonous. And so in order to be able to use cassava, it has to be pounded and washed and dried. And this is a rather complicated, elaborate procedure. It's then made into a flour. The flour has a very high content of starch, but very little protein. You can get protein from the leaves of the cassava. Another term for the cassava is tapioca. It's just tapioca flour that we're familiar with it in Western markets. Now, different parts of the world invented different kinds of crops and domesticated different sorts of animals. Vavilov, the founder of plant history and plant geography, was a Soviet botanist who made collections all over the world of plants. And he suggested the following: in those regions of the world where you get the greatest diversity of living relatives for a plant, that will be the place of origin of that kind of plant. So from finding out where is the greatest diversity of types of plants, Vavilov suggested that there are a number of regions of origin in the world. One region is the Middle East, and that's a place where you get wheat, barley, oats, onions. The town of Escalon in the middle of the Middle East refers to scallions. Because of the drought, annual cropping was difficult, and tree crops were particularly important. The Bible refers to the olive and the fig as an important part of people's nutrition. I mentioned before that it was possible to grow crops in the highlands of Judea once they developed a way of storing water over the dry season with lime. Before that, people were much more animal herdsmen. And we have ancient records of animals, goats and sheep first, then cattle. The animals lived in close proximity to people. And now here we come to one of the interesting principles of historical epidemiology. You can get diseases, people can get diseases of certain kinds from cows. But let's consider what kind. Cows are mammals. They're similar to people. And the lung of a cow, or the nervous system of a cow, is relatively similar to the lung and nervous system of humans. On the other hand, the digestive system of cattle is quite different. Cows feed on different foods. They feed on grass and so on. As a result of this, you are unlikely to find microorganisms that are shared by cows and people. So what we have are things like tuberculosis, which spilled over to people from cattle. And there'll be other such diseases, some of the parasitic worms. Tapeworm is shared with people and animals. In the Americas, you did not have real domestication on any scale. Late on in American history, the horse was reintroduced. Now, the horse existed in North America in Pleistocene times. There are fossil horses, but that was before there were people here. The horse disappeared from the Americas and was reintroduced by the Spaniards. They escaped from Spanish captivity and were redomesticated by the Native Americans. Once they were redomesticated, you get the development of the horse culture. Styles of hunting, styles of warfare, of ornamentation, social relations, and so on. For the most part, the Plains societies were egalitarian. They were organized in kinship groups. There'd be people who may have had more prestige because they were more successful warriors. But decisions by the community were made collectively in large council meetings. One of the first that was studied were the Iroquois Confederacy. Lewis Henry Morgan was the anthropologist who studied the Iroquois and shocked the minds of Europe that these were people who had an organized society without royalty, without kings. So it was basically a classless society which nevertheless could reach collective decisions. And the decisions would take place in great meetings of the council. Originally there were 5 tribes. Longfellow's poem Hiawatha is a fictionalized account of the forming of the Iroquois Confederacy. It was partly organized for reasons of defense against the Algonquians. At these meetings, everybody could speak up. That means men and women. It is said, and I don't know how true this is, that the Iroquois used to hold their discussions while drunk, and then the next day they would do the voting while sober. The Confederacy lived in a large swath of land from up the Hudson River going westward to as far as Michigan. At various times other groups joined in with them. They were a mixture of agriculturists and hunters. They did grow corn. Corn spread into North America from Mexico. And you find varieties of corn that were domesticated by the different Native American peoples. And so when I was doing ecological research on corn, we found varieties in Upper Quebec, up near the temperature boundary. And these were very short plants. They would be about so high, short growing season, grew very quickly, but apparently there was enough for the native Quebecois to be able to grow corn. Probably not as their major subsistence, but it was part of their subsistence system. Are there any questions? Okay, now what I would like to do is go on to organizing some of the assignments. The first assignment is a maximum of a 1-page paper, which you'll hand in a week, and do not sign it. And I'm not concerned with grading here, but with seeing what your thinking is like on various topics. The topic for the paper is what is the relationship between population and famine. There are two important readings in your collection here. Garrett Hardin's paper, The Tragedy of the Commons, and Ian Angus's paper, I think he calls it A Response to Hardin. Hardin's paper has become part of the common culture of ecologically minded people. It starts out with the premise that there's not enough. And because there's not enough, only some will survive. And he discusses the question of who will survive. So he takes a very competitive view. This competitive view of production and of food sharing is something which was picked up by the common culture of contemporary historians as well, contemporary anthropologists. And so you'll have stories to the effect that the good hunters got more meat and therefore were able to win more women. What actually happens in hunter-gatherer societies is, first of all, that people may hunt either individually or collectively, depending on the animal. Secondly, the hunt is brought back and shared. It's divided up. It may be that there are rules of sharing, like the heart meat going to the hunter, but basically everybody gets a share in the catch of the hunt. Hunting was not an exclusive province of men. Hunting and gathering go together. And very often what would happen is that women would go out and sneak behind trees to bop a small animal on the head. And this is also part of hunter-gathering society. They would gather gourds and other crops, and they had an enormous knowledge of the growth of plants. Among the Bushmen of the Kalahari, in the course of their wanderings, they will know when the gourds are ripening and are full of water. The water content of the gourd is important in a place that's dry. So they would migrate, and along the way they would know which plants would be found where and how to use these plants. People have gone out, anthropologists, to study some of the hunter-gatherer societies. You have the illusion that hunter-gatherers work very hard. They spend all their time hunting. Well, it turns out not to be quite true. These anthropologists went to a community of the bush, that's the San Bushmen, and found that in the morning the women gathered together and gossiped and talked, told stories, sang songs. And this was a surprise to the anthropologist, who said, well, how come you're not gathering and hunting now? And they laughed and said, we have to wait until the lions go to sleep. So it's not we visualize people as getting up at the break of day and working hard and so on. And it's not always the case. People adjust their gathering and their hunting to the environment, to their dangers, to the things that they could gather, but also the things that might gather them. Now, in ancient times, we were a species which suffered from predators. The predators included the big cats, lions, leopards, tigers, and so on, crocodiles, sharks. So there's relatively few species of animals that could prey on humans. lions were very common in Europe in ancient times. And one of the questions that we can deal with is how come the Romans threw Christians to lions, but there's now an abundance of Christians and a shortage of lions? The lions disappeared from Europe. There once was a European lion. Nowadays, lions are restricted to Africa. Similarly, tigers are restricted to Asia. You get things like leopards more widespread. Large animals need a large amount of prey. In order to get a large amount of prey, they require a large area. So it may be hundreds of square miles or tens of square miles would be the home range, let's say, of a puma, a mountain lion in the southwest. Now this immediately will have certain consequences. First of all, there aren't very many of them. They don't tend to hang around in large groups. There are a few exceptions, like lions, which do live together in groups, and they hunt collectively. Middle-sized predators can afford to be in groups and packs, and that's where you get things like wolves. And so the wolves tend to feed on things like mice. They're generally not predators of people. Then you get the small predators, the mink, weasels, and these are much more abundant than the big predators. And you see them increase in abundance if the big predators are removed. It's one of the things that happened in Israel in the last generation or so was that there was a number of cases of human rabies for the first time in 30 years. The Ministry of Health got really concerned about it and tried to find out who were the vectors of rabies. And they decided that they were jackals. And so they had a program for eliminating jackals from Israel. This was done by putting out poison bait. The jackal is a kind of medium-sized predator in the wolf family. So the jackals declined, but this did not eliminate rabies. What happened was the following. The jackal is also a predator of foxes. And in those areas where the jackals are abundant, the foxes were essentially eliminated. Foxes are abundant throughout the Middle East. And with the elimination of jackals, foxes started coming in from Syria and from Jordan. I think it's mostly the Syrian foxes that invaded Israel and Lebanon. But now what made it possible for the foxes to become so abundant is two things. One is that their enemies were eliminated, and two, that their food supply increased. Because this happened to be the period of the first Intifada. And in the course of the Intifada, the Israelis stopped hiring Arabs. So the occupation's income for Arabs was very much diminished, and what the Arabs started doing was raising chickens in their backyards. The catch is that chickens are fox food. And so the elimination of jackals along with the Intifada, led to an increase in chickens, which led to an increase in foxes, which were reservoirs of rabies. And these are the kinds of stories that ecology is full of, that things happen by indirect pathways. Now, during the next to the last week in the course, there are going to be group reports. You'll form groups of 3 or 4 people, and you'll work out a report on a rather broad ecological topic. You may choose a topic, for example, a problem like famine, drought, species migration, or you may choose a kind of habitat, a rainforest, coral reef, semi-arid regions, or deserts. You could choose a problem like demography, how different kinds of societies cope with changing conditions and with changing demography, with changing settlement. The idea is to choose one of these topics and work together as a group. Now, it's really important in working as a group that you not divide up the topic among you and each do a separate report. Rather, I would like the group to meet together and to analyze a problem, and particularly to look at the connections among phenomena that are not obviously connected. Because the major theme of ecology is that things are connected. The connections aren't always obvious. And what I would like you to do is trace out connections among phenomena that are not obviously connected. Oh, you can also take a historical topic, such as the development of agriculture, or historical epidemiology. And why is it that different human civilizations and populations suffer from different diseases? This will be important next week when I deal with the question of the resurgence and the emergence of new infectious disease. So there we're dealing with the question of a relation between our species and other species again. So the way we go about organizing it is that next week, those of you who have thought of topics will write them on the blackboard. And then everybody in the class will write their name under one or more topics. Typically what happens is that we get 4 or 5 topics put on the board. Each of them has the same people in several of them. Some of them may only have 2 people. And then we do some juggling and eventually set up for the final groups. The reason the reports are presented in the next to the last week is that it allows time for feedback. And it also allows time for finishing up loose ends in the course. The report should be presented orally. You'll get a whole class period for presenting the report. And you're free to invent the way in which you present it. What I don't want is each person giving a separate paper. But each of you may talk several times in the course of the presentation. You may present questions. Sometimes when we deal with a question, we don't reach an answer. And then you have to deal with the question, how would we go about looking for an answer. Because remember that science is full of change and uncertainty. And in the course of my lifetime, a lot of the dearly held scientific theories were eliminated. In chemistry, we were taught that the noble gases, like neon and radon and so on, do not form compounds. Well, we know they do, particularly when you get a very volatile atom like fluorine. It can form compounds with what supposedly were inert gases. And that transformed a lot of our notions of chemistry. It was believed that the geography of the Earth was something fixed. It was at the time when I was a graduate student that they began talking about Continental Drift. Also discovering that the Earth's magnetic field can be shifting. Let's see what else. In atomic physics, there were certainly major differences. Things like the inferences about dark matter, the conclusion of an expanding universe. In anthropology, there was the recognition that not only do peoples move, but also that cultures change. And that some regions of the world are very labile, people constantly doing different kinds of things, partly because they have different resources, partly because of different climate. For instance, sometime around 2200 BC, there were tremendous windstorms in the Middle East. Sand was deposited. When you excavate there, you find layers of sand. What happened was that the peoples who lived there abandoned their settlements, went elsewhere. They could no longer cultivate. Sand buried it. And then a few hundred years afterward, people are back again. And they're doing different kinds of things, making different kinds of pots, using different kinds of weapons, having different kinds of belief system. So one area of contemporary Middle Eastern archaeology is the study of Canaanite religion. The Canaanite kingdoms were along the Palestinian coast up through Lebanon, down to Egypt. They were dominated by Egypt. They had their own administrations, and they had their own rather elaborate kinds of religions. They're the brand X that are talked about in the biblical accounts when they denounce the idolaters and so on. These are the Canaanite city-states. And there's replacement of one by another. Peoples drift in and drift out. Then you get the Assyrians and the Babylonians. And all of these are important for periods of decades or hundreds of years. And they have very different ways of life, sometimes radically different languages. For instance, ancient Akkadian is not the same as Babylonian. And then the Persians came in with their own language. So the idea is that human activity is highly volatile. The idea that ancient civilizations